This conference will now be recorded.
So the recording for the May 13th, 2022 Board of Trustees meeting is now on. The board has called the meeting to order, taken roll call, and approved the agenda for item 1.3. We'll now move on to item 1.4. Mr. Gilbert, will you do the Pledge of Allegiance for us?
Join me in the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Tom. Item 1.5, conflict of interest. Do any of the trustees have a conflict of interest for items on the agenda? If so, please identify that now and we will recuse you from that item. Hearing none, we'll move on. We do not have any scheduled presentations from outside agencies today for item 2. Item 3 now, public comment on non-agendized items. If there's members from the public who would wish to speak on non-agendized items, you have 3 minutes to address the board, and we can take those public comments now.
Yes, hello. Kevin, I wanted to mention that I've made the request to have consent calendar item 5.7 pulled.
Yeah, Mr. Tully, so Mr. Tully, I got it, it's on there. I did receive your request, and when we get to the consent calendar, I'll make that known to the board that there's public comment on 5.7.
Okay, so can I make public comment on 5.7 now in the public, or wait?
No, we'll open that to public comment when we pull that from the consent calendar, Mr. Tully.
Okay, so it will get pulled.
Correct.
Okay, thank you. Then I'll wait.
Thank you. And then when we make public comment, Mr. Tully, if you could, for the record, when we get to you on public comments, just identify yourself and address so we have it for the record. Thank you.
Of course.
Any other public comments on non-agendized items? Hearing none, we'll move on to informational items. The general manager's report for this month is basically the staff reports that are that have been provided. It's been a lot of work on the 2 agendized items. I will provide a thorough update at the June meeting on activities. Just ran out of time to include that in the packet. We are making progress on the Natomas Levee Improvement Project, and I can follow up after the meeting. I do have an update from Gabe and Paul on their activities as far as the Levee Improvement Project work has been going. And then just in general, we've been working pretty heavily on, three different items. Getting ready for our upcoming election, working on our outreach materials. You saw the video that was playing at the beginning of the meeting. That's one of the products. We're working on adding some voiceover to that as well. And I'm envisioning kind of Morgan Freeman's voice as a narrative in the background, or narrating that video shoot, and we'll use that in different forums. So been working on that, as well as the budget. We've had numerous committee meetings over the last month and a half to go through the draft budget, which we'll get to today on item 6.1. And I have a presentation I've put together to guide us through that discussion today. And then also on the item 6.2 for the technical memorandum for the comprehensive financial plan phase 2.2. So we've been busy, really busy, and it's not reflective in the GM report for this month because the work product's within the board packet today. So thank you for your understanding. I ran out of time to do that, and I'm wanting to get the packet out to all of you, but I will make sure next month that an update's provided, and from April and May. Any questions for me on that?
Kevin?
Yes.
No questions on the general manager's report, but I did notice on the agenda it says that the urbanization committee did not meet since the last meeting, and we met this past Tuesday. So
yes, thank you for that. We did, when we posted the agenda, that organization meeting hadn't been called for yet, and so I didn't make a change to the agenda that we posted last Friday. Excuse me, I think we posted it Thursday. And then we called because we got the information and checked in with the urbanization committee about the issue we discussed. But I will include that in the agenda and report out from the meeting. And you are right, Deborah, we did have a urbanization committee this Wednesday, and we can definitely state that for the record. And I'll report out the minutes from that meeting at our June board meeting.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Anything else for me? Okay, we'll move on to the operations manager's report. Any questions for Gabe or myself on the operations manager's report? All right, hearing none, move on to, oh, go ahead, was there something? Oh, okay. Moving on to item 4.3, general counsel report. Rebecca, the floor is yours.
Good morning. As Kevin mentioned, you've all been very busy this month. We've been working in a supporting role on a number of the items Kevin mentioned, but particularly your election, assisting in your outreach efforts, and in preparing and responding to your tech memo that you'll review later in this meeting. So.
Thank you, Rebecca. Any questions for Rebecca? And it also, Rebecca's, she mentioned the election, and that's on the consent calendar for, the election procedures. So she's been working pretty extensively, and we're still on track to meet our time frame and the schedule for the district's general election this fall.
Yeah, that's right. And as Kevin notes, it's on the consent calendar. You'll see in our staff report, but also just sort of highlighting in the district council's report, we went through and identified all sort of the frequently asked questions, areas that staff needed more direction on from your last election, consolidated those all down into one written process for you, and that's what's before you today. Not technically required in order to conduct your election, but we felt like it was a nice best practices, so you could just have this in your wheelhouse and have an easy reference point instead of having to run down your options every time you had a question. So.
Yeah, so thanks, Rebecca. And I did, for the rest of the board, and this will be reported at the June meeting, as Deborah pointed out, the urbanization committee did discuss the outreach for the election, and this is based on the feedback from the last election and kind of lessons learned. So we do have a plan in place that the urbanization committee looked at. I'm still due to get them a schedule for outreach, but in general, we're going to provide some information, some direct mailers, and some social posts well in front of our constituents receiving a ballot in their mailbox this fall, and then questioning, is it valid like last time, so we do have a plan there, and I will share that back with the board in June when I report out the minutes from urbanization. So yeah, the election has been one of those things that Rebecca and I and Jolene have been working on quite a bit. So thanks, Rebecca. If there's no questions for Rebecca, we can move on to the consent calendar. All right, so on to consent calendar, we do have a request, Mr. President Gilbert, to pull item 5.7 for public discussion. No other requests have been received by the district, so I would entertain a motion to approve consent calendar items 5.1 through 5.6 and 5.8. I'm sorry. Yeah, through 5.6 and 5.8 and 5.9.
So moved, Burns.
Second, Happy.
All right.
Deborah can have.
All right. Nick yields the floor to Deborah second. So motion by Trustee Burns, second by Trustee Jones. Jolene, will you take a roll?
Yes, Trustee Gilbert.
Aye.
Gilbert Eiley Reader.
Aye.
Reader I. Aptis.
Aye.
Aptis I. Baines.
Aye.
Baines I. Burns.
Aye.
Burns I. Jones.
Aye.
Jones, aye. Consent calendar items 5.1 through 5.6, 5.8, 5.9 are approved.
Thank you, Jolene. So we do have a request for item 5.7 to make public comment on the item. I will pull it up now, and then I will talk about item 5.7 just for a staff brief, and then we'll open it up for public comment and then turn it over to the board for discussion and possible action. So item 5.7 is the award of contract, and this is to review and consider authorizing the general manager to execute the construction contract with Emerald Site Services for the Natomas Levee Basin Vegetative Maintenance Project Phase 4. It is Phase 4. This is the 4th year that we've received funding from DWR and the FMAP grant program. And so this is the 4th phase. The prior 3 phases, if you recall, we've done quite a bit of vegetation clearing and modification per the operations and maintenance manuals and requirements and everything we need to do to operate and maintain the levee system. The program is set up for deferred maintenance, and so it's a tremendous program. It's probably one of the best grant programs I've ever seen in my career, in that there's no required local match for this program at this time. And so fully funding our vegetation removal, and we've made some significant equipment purchases in the prior FMAP projects. And so again, and this year, the state awarded us $450,000 to continue on our veg maintenance project. And primarily, we've spent these funds on the Sacramento River East Side Levee, all the way from the most northern part of the district, working our way through. We've used Emerald Site Services the 3 prior years. A very good contractor, easy to work with. They're responsive. And they were the only qualified bidder that submitted a response to our request for proposals. And if you recall, we've used goats in the past too. The very first year we used some goats to do some of this work, and it's been a tremendous program for us. It's really cleaned up a lot of the areas that now we can get in and mow on an annual basis, because all of that, tree and brush stuff has been cleared back or trimmed up so that we can actually access the levee system to maintain it, primarily on the riverside embankment. So this is a continuation. Like I said, it's $450,000. The contract specs for this year, there's 2 schedules, and the intent is to use a lot of the funding, primarily the funding, make it available to the Garden Highway folks that are part of the Seeing Levees Save Lives, the high hazard encroachments. There's about 100 properties. The board's aware of that. We've had community meetings on it. So we're making this funding available to address those those high hazard concerns. And so we've communicated that with the public, and that's the intent. The second schedule in the contract, if there are remaining funds after we get through the landscape modification stuff on the high hazard encroachments, we don't want to turn the money back over to the state. We want to use it because we're leveraging that grant program for the benefit of all Natomas in our overall budget and expenditures. So about $500,000 here coming to the district, no local match. Like I said, if there is any money left over after we go through, the first priority would be addressing those high hazards. Money left over will continue on our program that we have done the last 3 years on the district's levee system and public property there. So continuation of the work we've done, and I think it's a great program, and Emerald's ready to go. They did provide a schedule to us this week to go through those high hazard encroachments. We will be posting that to our Seeing Levees Saves Lives. And then additionally, as discussed with the urbanization committee on Wednesday, is that we'll be sending postcards out to those properties. The contractor, Emerald, has provided the schedule wherein they will go kind of block by block, address block by address block, and do 10 to 15 a week. And so we'll provide a postcard to the property owners that are going to be, the contractor will be on site. We'll provide that postcard a week prior to them showing up. And so if there's any questions or for some reason they haven't heard about what's going on, they'll have that, one last heads up. And Gabe's going to personally deliver some of those postcards as well and make sure they get put in the mailbox. And we'll also have a presence out on site, with an RD1000 truck and a staff member with the contractors so that they're easily identified when they show up onto the property. So I'll turn it over to the board for questions, and then we'll open up for public comment.
I'd like to hear from the public first before my comments.
Yeah, well, why don't we go ahead and do that? So we do have a request. Mr. Tully, I know that you've put in a request to address the board on this item, so we'll receive your public comment now. Just keep in mind we have 3 minutes for public comment, and I'll ask Christina to start a timer here, and she'll give you a 30-second warning when your time's nearly complete. So Mr. Tully, feel free.
Okay, thank you. I am Patrick Tully, 3067 Garden Highway, president of the Garden Highway Community Association. Since 2008, the GHAA has represented 300 residents, homeowners, business owners, and private property owners along the Sacramento River and the land side of Garden Highway from the city of Sacramento County, city of Sacramento to Sutter County. Garden Highway residents support flood protection that is risk-based and evidence-based. Removing landscape vegetation from the riverside of Garden Highway is neither. GHCA strongly objects to RD1000's vegetation removal and to the premature awarding of a contract for vegetation and tree removal for the following reasons. Awarding the contract is premature in light of many problems. Removal of landscaping and habitat will cause irreparable harm to the Natomas Basin. With the new Natomas levee, the riverside of Garden Highway levee is now outside the levee landscape prism. There is no need to remove waterside landscaping and habitat. RD1000 has not done an environmental study nor provided mitigation for the large-scale removal. RD1000 stands alone in their desire to remove vegetation and habitat along the Sacramento River. RD1000 has failed to provide each property owner a scope of work, nor a copy of the survey. No specific written information has been provided that would allow an informed consent by the property owner to allow RD1000 on their private property. RD1000 has not obtained written permission from property owners to be on their private property or to remove their vegetation. Without informed written consent to be on private property and remove private property, RD1000 subjects itself to significant liability. RD1000 has failed to notify property owners that the vegetation removal is optional. In the January 21 letter to the property owners, RD1000 wrote the vegetation removal was, quote, not optional. It is federally mandated requirement. This is false. In fact, vegetation removal is not federally mandated in this case. We have written communication from the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers stating that because Garden Highway Riverside Levee is outside the new levee prism, removal of vegetation is not required on the riverside of Garden Highway. RD1000 has led property owners to believe that RD1000's vegetation removal actions are required by law. RD1000 is not an enforcement agency. RD1000 needs to clarify in writing that it has no legal authority to enter private property and enforce regulations without the permission of the homeowners. In RD1000's February online presentation, participants were told that only 3 feet of vegetation would be removed and no trees would be removed. In April's online presentation, they were told vegetation, including trees, would be removed to the total levee except for large trees. A dramatic difference. Participants were told that vegetation removal was necessary for RD1000 to receive federal monies. That is false. A law passed by Congress in 2014 and 2 separate U.S. Corps of Engineer documents clearly and repeatedly that local entities are not required to remove vegetation to gain or maintain federal support. The vegetation has existed for 50 years on the Garden Highway and with no threat of flood safety.
That's time.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Tully, for your comments. Any other public comment on item 5.7?
Yes,
And
my name is
one last thing, Kevin, I would like to send this in to have it put on record.
Sure, go ahead and send me a copy of what you just read and I'll put it into the minutes. It sounded like we did have someone else that wanted to make comment.
Yep, I would like to make comment. My name is Jane Joe. I live on Garden Highway. Our Garden Highway homes and our landscaping and fencing are what protects us from crime. Residents have quietly endured decades of levee construction work, understanding that as the setback levee in front of our properties are incrementally completed, as per the EIR, our properties and our sanctuaries for all the species of birds, bees, bats, ladybugs, hummingbirds, finches, robins, woodpeckers, hawks, turkeys, and everything in between. We knew from the government presented documents that eventually we would be completely outside the levee prism. In other words, we knew we had to endure construction because we knew the Natomas Basin had to be built out. But we saw the light at the end of the tunnel, that at some point our lives would be back to that which property tax paying property owners enjoy, the private and peaceful use of their homes and property. Our waterside properties have become, quote, the promised land, unquote, for all the birds and animals along Garden Highway. And our properties are a huge contrast to the blight that is being left behind by the levee work, where 200-year-old oak trees formerly grew, where Indians sat in their shade and ground acorns into food. Trees were cut into firewood and chipped into pieces of their former greatness. Thousands of trees of all varieties are gone, and the homes they provided to wildlife are also gone. As devastation began, the little creatures could be seen crossing the Garden Highway into our yards for sanctuary. While some of them made it, others perished when they were run over by construction equipment. Turtles, frogs, foxes, beavers, otters all had to make a run for our yards and the vegetational cover and habitat our yards provide. The monstrous levee and all of the land purchased by the various government entities now needs to be maintained by paid government workers or paid contractors. Acre upon acre of non-productive levee lands that are essentially now potential fuel for grass fires when left unmowed. The lands have become a dumping ground for trash piles left by the irresponsible, the homeless, the day-use fishermen. Policing of illegal camping and day-use users who abuse the lands should be daily work by RD 1000. Vehicles are driving on the government-owned lands and the new levees where tires degrade the grasses and expose dirt that becomes subject to erosion during the rains. With all this work RD 1000 should be doing in maintaining their own land, they have chosen to attempt to turn
30 seconds remain.
homeowners clearly to avoid the spotlight that should be on themselves. Lo and behold, RD 1000 and its new board and or executive director decided to introduce failed legislation in the legislative session 2021, where they sought to give themselves more tools to harass property owners. Why did RD 1000 need legislation? Because the harassment you are attempting is not within current law. You are breaking the written law and the environmental law. Most surprisingly, RD 1000 has taken the path to villainize homeowners in public press releases to again redirect the spotlight from your $250,000 worth of annual pesticide usage or huge salary.
Thank you, your time is concluded. We have to move on for the meeting. We appreciate those comments and we'll enter them into the record. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other comments from the public? Hearing none, I'll turn it back over to the board for discussion on item 5.7. Thank you.
So Kevin, to be clear, obviously a lot to unpack there. I know there's been an ongoing discussion with the folks on Garden Highway, and I understand we're still working through those outreach efforts. As it relates to this contract, though, it includes work to be done by Emerald Site Services beyond just any sort of vegetation removal along Garden Highway, correct?
Well, it does include vegetation removal and modification, but beyond the 100 properties for the high hazard encroachment properties that's been referenced here, the private properties. If the funds, we want to make that available to those that want to take advantage of the grant funding here to have the modifications performed. If we don't expend, so that's the first use of those funds in this contract. The second use would be a continuation of the other vegetation removal and modification that we've been doing the past 3 years. And so there was reference to changing, being told that there was, only 3 feet of vegetation would be kept back. And then all of a sudden, there's tree removal. We have done tree removal in the past on our own, projects, those past 3 years. and that's included as a potential item. There are restrictions on the tree removal. We follow those guidelines. Before we do any of that work on in certain areas, we do perform a biological survey. We've done that the past 3 years and identify threatened or endangered species. And so, yeah, so there is work beyond. This contract does provide for work beyond if we have remaining funds after the high hazard encroachments are addressed. But we felt, and the board has been briefed on this previously, about using this funds to help out the property owners here, so that they eventually don't end up in enforcement action by the Centralized Flood Protection Board.
So Kevin, on one of the points is Emerald Site Services going to enter anybody's property without their permission?
Well, so the district does have operations and maintenance easement on the levee to do that work. So we have the right and authority and obligation for the operation and maintenance of the levee. And so we're not going to forcibly enter the property. If there's locked gates or something, that could be problematic for the contractor to get in. But if there's a locked gate and they can't reach it, we will not enter their property without them notifying, without direct contact. If there's a locked gate or something like that, we're definitely not going to go in there.
So
likewise, if we hear from a property owner when they receive that postcard that they do not want us there, absolutely don't come on to the property. Don't do a property take. In their mind, property take as far as the landscape vegetation. We will tell the contractor, instruct the contractor to move beyond that property, and then we'll just keep working down on their schedule. I can share with you that our operations manager has met with many property owners over the course of the last 5 months, since January. There are a lot of property owners that are very much cooperative, appreciate the district's efforts, and have said, yep, does great. In fact, we have a few of them that have volunteered to, preemptively, trim up and ask us to come back out and see if that looks, and actually said, no, I know this is my responsibility as a property owner, use the funds for something else or some other purpose. And, they're actually starting to implement some of that stuff. So I just wanted to provide some more context and feedback that there is a large portion of those 100 that we've had very positive interactions with, and we're ready to go.
I guess my point is here, if Mr. Tully and his neighbors do not want RD1000 entering their property for these maintenance purposes, they can notify RD1000. I mean, ultimately, this gets referred to the Central Valley Board, and while I understand that that's another layer of government, but it's really the requirements of the board and their enforcement of those requirements that really drives this process. RD1000 doesn't exist in a vacuum. So, we're offering, I think, a financial incentive to engage in this high hazard veg clearing here. I think if Mr. Tully and others don't want to take advantage of that, certainly at some point this will get referred to the Central Valley Board, and certainly there is a due process available there as it relates to this high hazard veg removal issue. So,
correct. That is correct, and we made that known to the community during the April 27th meeting. If you're vehemently opposed to this and do not wish to take advantage of this program and this funding opportunity at this time, please tell us as soon as possible, and we'll have the contractor move beyond that. When we finish through the contractor's schedule, Emerald's schedule there, if the board awards the contract today, the properties that were skipped or we're told don't come on, we don't want to participate in this program with the funding available, I'll return back to the board post to talk about the next decision point. But really it's, in compliance with Title 23 and the Centralized Flood Protection Board. And so you're right that at some point the district will be put in a position to notify. It is our obligation and responsibility as the local maintaining agency to notify the Central Valley Flood Protection Board when there's violations or need for enforcement action, and then it's their process. So this is a great opportunity for them to take advantage of it, because there's certainly an unknown expense on enforcement action and what comes out. I can tell you that I've reviewed probably 15 different properties out of the 100, with contacts that have come in, asking for information or requests to our SWIFT email account that we've set up to address those things. I've looked at the permits on file with the Centralized Flood Protection Board, and of those 15 properties, not a single one had a permit for landscape vegetation. And so the first process would be for those property owners that do not wish to participate is to file for a permit for those encroachments and then ask for a vegetative variance, is what we've been told by the Centralized Flood Protection Board. Those encroachment permits take upwards of 18 to 24 months to process, and could be timely and costly for them as an individual property owner. And then there's no guarantee for approval. So that's the process. If they don't want to participate, let us know. Send me an email, send me a letter, send a carrier pigeon. Just let us know, and we'll have the contractor skip you.
All right. I don't have any other questions right now.
Thanks, Nick. Any other questions from trustees?
Kevin, this is Scott Shapiro. I don't have a question, but just for the trustees' benefit, Rebecca and I do not agree with many of the legal explanations provided by the two commentors. We just think you should know, as your district's counsel, that the framework as described regarding state, local, and federal obligations and programs is not aligned with either our experience or our research on these issues.
Thank you, Scott.
Scott, thank you actually for chiming in on that, because I think it's important to understand, and I think this is something that's getting lost. I mean, I understand people live along the Garden Highway. I myself live along the East Main Drain, a little bit of a different setup, but nevertheless adjacent to the levee, and understand some of the issues as it relates to right-of-way acquisition and the needs of maintaining the levee system. In fact, my family history has been one where we've been on the unfortunate receiving end of significant eminent domain actions, and I'm no friend of government infringement on folks' ability to live their lives as they want to. However, it's become clear to me over the years that we have a certain responsibility as property owners adjacent to the levee system, greater than just the frontage we may have or connection we may have with the levee structure itself, and kind of surrounding appurtenances as it relates to the ongoing O&M aspects of it. I have at least come to the conclusion, and Scott, I'm directing this question towards you. I don't feel that from a decision-making perspective, RD 1000 really has a lot of latitude here. We don't have the ability to just waive off these requirements. As the local maintaining agency, we have certain duties and obligations here as it relates to the ongoing maintenance of the system, and taking actions to prevent obviously any issues ultimately that might undermine the levee system. But I mean, can you just quickly summarize your perspective on really the latitude this board has on this high hazard veg removal issue here?
Yeah, sure, I'm happy to. But maybe even before talking about the latitude, it's important to acknowledge that the action that the board is considering today is not to impose anything on anyone. What the board would be approving today is the creation of a program funded by the state 100%, which would allow property owners to take advantage of those funds to remove the vegetation that the district and its partners at the state and local and federal level have determined creates a risk. as Kevin talked about, if a property owner objects to the free removal of the vegetation, the property owner can respond to the postcard and say, don't come on my property. And under the program Kevin's created, the district will abide by that. And so nothing's being imposed on anyone. This is an opportunity to not have to either pay for it yourself, if that's what the enforcement action from the state determines. It's also an action to participate in reducing risk for the basin. So I just wanted to start with that, Nick, just because I think it's important to recognize nothing's being imposed anyway. In terms of the standards are...
Scott, if I could jump in there real quick. Scott mentioned vegetation removal, and I want to make sure, yes, removal, and you look at the definition there, yes, you're removing something from the property, but largely, in part, for the board's understanding, the public that's on the call today, largely it's modification, not complete removal. So when Scott mentions removal, yes, we will be removing some vegetation from these properties, but it's not complete removal. And so modification is really it, and this is in compliance with the vegetative variance that's been afforded with the improved strength and levee. So Scott, I just wanted to clarify that, because we've had feedback about the term removal, and it's created some confusion there. So go ahead, Scott, keep on.
Yeah, Kevin, that's a great clarification. And for those of you who get out and about around Sacramento and have driven over the H Street Bridge between Sac State and Campus Commons lately and looked up and downstream, you'll see the vegetation removal that the Corps has done recently, which is much more extreme than what Kevin and his crew are proposing to provide accommodation for. So Nick, your question was, do we have a lot of flexibility? And our job is to implement the standards that we're told by both the state and the federal government. And the standards are more complicated than what was explained in the public comment. There are overlapping standards as a result of different federal obligations. There are federal obligations in order to stay certified and accredited under FEMA. There are federal obligations to operate and maintain the system as an assurance partner of the Army Corps of Engineers, the work it has done. There are obligations associated with ensuring we stay in the PL 8499 program. And those are benefits that both provide flood fighting as well as levee reconstruction in the event of damage or failure. And then we have an additional set of obligations from the state of California and the Central Valley Flood Protection Board under its Title 23 rules. I should point out that in addition to these being standards, it's the engineering judgment of RD1000's engineers that this is the best program to reduce risk for the basin. And I certainly understand the argument that there's never been a problem here. Why are we doing it? And maybe I've gone beyond legal here into practical, but there are lots of levees that haven't failed for 100 years and then they fail. And up until the day they failed, the response was, it's never failed in 100 years, so we don't have anything to worry about. Every problem is a first problem for a levee. And so Nick, I hope I've answered your question, and I've tried to avoid being on the soapbox.
No, I appreciate that, Scott. With that, I'm comfortable moving the item. There might be obviously more discussion, but.
A second.
So a motion by Trustee Abbas, second by Trustee Lee Reader. Any further discussion before we move to?
Yeah, Kevin, I just want a clarification. We told the homeowners on the Garden Highway that there was a certain date that we weren't going to provide this funding. What was that date? Like June 1st?
Oh, yeah, Chris. So good question. We do. So the program is intended to start. The contractor schedule is June 6th. That they'll start on that first block as we receive from Emerald if the board awards today. We do have to. The grant requires that we have all invoices and final payments made by December 31st. The district's terms for payment are net 30. And so we need the contractor essentially to be finished with all invoiced work by almost November 15th, so they can submit an invoice by December 1st so we can pay and then report to the state.
Okay, so my point is, I just want to make sure that we provide as much opportunity to those willing homeowners who are property owners who want to take advantage of this service and this funding, whether we pick a date or whatever. Because the contract covers more things, and if people don't take advantage of it, I want to make sure that we're going to use that money
Yes.
in the time frame to then go after some of our property, which I believe is what is in the contract. So, but I want to make sure that we provide enough. So as long as it's being used for willing property owners and not for other, I agree with Nick. I'm good with that.
Yeah, Chris. So the first priority, as stated there, was that we'll go through those property owners first. If there are remaining funds, then we'll transition, because we don't want to turn this, $500,000, turn it back over to the state. It's a huge advantage for the district to have this program. And so we'll then turn our focus to that second schedule on a time and materials and continue on, from the first three phases. If a property owner does tell us that they don't want to participate at this time, when the contractor's, there and ready, that they let us know a week ahead of time and we skip them, there may not be funds available if they change their mind before December 1st, right?
Oh, I understand. That's what I wanted. As long as we're using those funds beyond the
Yes.
months, we'll say, and I don't say give them a hard deadline, but I understand. I just want to make sure that we're focused on those willing property owners who are willing to take advantage of this. Thank you.
Yeah, and I do want to point out that a consent item that was approved earlier, so 5.8 and 5.9, at the time of the April 27th public meeting on this, we did communicate with the public that there's no guarantee for future grant funding, because we hadn't received the participation or the proposal solicitation package from the state for FMAP for next year. And it's usually, we'd have that in like March or April every year. We didn't have it, and I actually got it last week, so we put it on the agenda so we can apply for more funds for next year, and we'll see how the program works. And we may have funding if we're awarded that for next year for addressing some more high hazard encroachments, but we're not sure we'll be awarded that, and we usually don't get a funding agreement for those funds until really late in this calendar year. If we are awarded any funding, and then at that point, we'll, as far as timeline for Centralized Flood Protection Board and enforcement cases, some property owners that have not taken advantage may already be in that process with direct, process with the Centralized Flood Protection Board for, enforcement action or, permits or whatever. So that's the plan. Fortunate that the state's funded another FMAP grant, and we can prioritize the work next year if we are awarded that grant. So I wanted to point that out, that there may be another opportunity, but not guaranteed.
Okay, thank you. I don't have any further questions.
Thanks, Trustee Burns. So I do have a motion and a second. If there's no further discussion for the board, I would entertain a roll call vote. Jag, you just queued up?
No, I'm good.
Okay, Jolene, will you take roll on item 5.7, award of contract to Emerald Site Services?
I will. Trustee Gilbert?
Aye.
Gilbert, I. Lee Reader?
Aye.
Lee Reader, I. Abdus?
Aye.
Abdus, I. Baines?
Aye.
Baines, I. Barandis?
Brandis, aye.
Brandis, I. Burns?
Aye.
Burns, I. Jones?
Aye.
Jones, I. Motion's approved.
Thank you, Jolene. We will now move on to item 6.1. This is our draft budget. And so right before the board meeting, I was putting the final touches. I do have a presentation to guide us through the discussion today. Keep in mind, this is draft. We have met with the various committees that have input on the draft as we build this for eventual approval at the June board meeting, so that we have a draft, or we have a budget approved by July 1, effective July 1 for our fiscal year 2022-2023. For the full board's information, we did have consensus and recommendations from the committees on the presented items as we move through those committees to present this in draft form with the budget assumptions that were presented. So this has been reviewed by Personnel, Operations, and the Finance Committee. And so I'll pull up a presentation here. Give me 1 second. And then I'll go to full screen. I'm going to turn my camera off here for a few minutes because it gets distracting when things are going on as I go through the presentation. So the camera will be off, but the mic will be on, and then you'll see my smiling face after the presentation, and we'll open up to the board. Feel free, if you have questions during this presentation, go ahead and let me know. and then we'll open up for public comment when the presentation is concluded, and then back to the board again. But if you do have a question from a trustee, please feel free to jump in there if you need clarification. So here we go. So this is a budget summary in the budget narrative that was provided to the board in the board packet. This is one of the first tables in there. The budget variance from net expense to revenue does show a variance of about $2.2 million. Partly on the revenue side, we do see a decrease in about $846,000 in revenue this year, and that's largely due to the district receiving $1.4 million from the Greenbrier development project last fiscal year. We do not anticipate any in-house, so that's a one-time payment that has been due to the district. We may receive upwards of $300,000 or in between from that as the Greenbrier closeout and final accounting is performed by the city. There may be some funds that are remaining due to the district, but we're not anticipating that, and it's not included in the revenue line for the budget. So literally the total revenues are our basic stuff, the reimbursement from Metro Air Park, and we'll get to that slide in a minute, but largely driven by the district's current assessment, which throws off about $2.3 million, and then the CCAD2 safety assessment, and we get about $1.4 million for that. And so that's where we get to the 3.8. There's a couple other things in there, but so down from the one-time payment we got from the development, and then expenditures are largely driven by an increase in the capital improvement budget. And as we go through the slide presentation here, we'll explain those things. But in all, the net expense to revenue, it is an unbalanced budget in that regard of $2.2 million. We do have some sufficient reserve funds to cover that net expense to revenue. So the revenue slide here, just going through the revenue line items, the district does receive, as I mentioned, approximately $2.3 million from the current assessment. The CCAD2 agreement, we have included the escalator that we negotiated and finalized the contract. There's an escalator in the in SAFCA's assessment of 1.4%. So we've added that in, and we'll submit an invoice to SAFCA next spring with that reflected in our invoice to them, and per the agreement that we just executed a couple months ago. Interest earnings will probably be down. The adopted budget in 21-22, we were seeing really great returns in interest rates, and then in addition to lower interest rate revenue, if we do pull money out of reserves for the unbalanced budget, that will obviously have a reflection of the principal balance, and therefore less interest received. As you can see, the estimate for the year into 21-22 of $32,000 fell well short of our hopes of the interest income of $55,000. We do have the lease agreement for the firehouse out by the courtyard with the city of Sacramento. There is an escalator in that agreement as well, and so that's won't apply until 23-24 budget, but the lease rent income is about $24,000. The Metro Air Park pumping, we submit an invoice to the city of Sacramento for the Metro Air Park pump station, and then they pay back for the electrical expense there. And it just varies on how much the pumps use, but it does match the expenditure line item for utilities for that particular pumping plant. FMAP grant, I've included no revenue in 22-23. We're not sure if we'll get awarded, and the submission package isn't due until the board just approved. The grant program is not approved or submitted until June 15th for our application, and so we're unsure at that amount, and we haven't been awarded yet, and so I've not included that as a revenue. At the time I built the budget, the PSP, the proposal solicitation package, hadn't even reached us yet, so I was aware of any FMAP funding. But if we do get awarded that grant when we get our application in, if we are awarded, we may see some increased revenue, but it'll be balanced exactly by the expenditure and added expenditure for FMAP grant funding. And this will be for next fiscal year. Let me go. All right. And then lastly, security patrol reimbursement just depends. We've had some requests over the last 2 years to increase the patrols by our security contractor, and this is a revenue stream and a cost share agreement between the Natomas Basin Conservancy as well as Natomas Mutual Water Company. And so, that's a revenue that comes in to offset as we're the contractor with our security firm. So all in all, you can see the decrease of $850,000 in revenue, and largely driven by that miscellaneous revenue that we received from the Greenbrier Development Project. I want to go through the personnel budget here. There's a lot to take in, and this is provided in the budget narrative in the board packet. I won't walk through line item by line item here. I have another slide to go through the major budget assumptions on labor and the budget impact. So cost of living, I discussed this extensively with the Personnel Committee and the Finance Committee. And the recommendation from the Finance Committee was to use the February 2022 Pacific Wage Earners Index for CPI, which was 8%. I did show a placeholder to the Finance Committee at our meeting from March, and that was 8.9. And so the consensus of the Finance Committee and the recommendation from the Personnel Committee was, we don't know if the cost of living is, and inflation generally in the nation is permanent, or if this is just a temporary spike. And so the Personnel Committee came up with a recommendation to provide a 4% COLA for wages for all employees, but also recognize to keep pace for this current fiscal year and the inflationary costs over the last 12 months, to additionally provide, as if we had provided an 8% COLA, but only provide 4% to the salary ranges, but then use that budgeted amount, which turns out to be exactly half of $42,000, almost $42,000 is one-time compensation this year, that if the budget is approved, the employees would receive that to keep pace, but not commit the district long-term to ongoing salary range increases. So if this is truly just a blip here and things kind of normalize and get back to where they've historically been, great. The employees have been kept current, and we've kept them current for this year, and then we didn't commit the district to long-term obligation of a 8% COLA. So this was recommended by the Personnel Committee and then reaffirmed by the Finance Committee. And so that's their recommendation for this year only. The one-time additional compensation will apply to all full-time employees, and that would again be paid out in July 1 if the board approves the budget in June. There are a few employees that are due a merit increase that costs about $25,000 in the next fiscal year, and this is due to them progressing through their achievements and work product at the district. Other pay, estimated overtime and certification pay, the board does recognize, or the district does recognize, employees that go out and get licenses or certifications that benefit the district, and we give them compensation to maintain their status, whether it's a Class A or Class B driver's license. It's very beneficial to the district to have that, and so the board has for a long time now recognized under certification pay. The overtime estimate, this is one of those areas in the budget that can vary greatly depending on the flood season. So this last year we did really well. In fact, we didn't enact our emergency action plan one time as the river relations maintained a low status, and so we didn't have to go on 24/7 patrol. The one variance there is we did have that large storm event in October, and we had some overtime. So this is a best guess on overtime, and over the last 5 years in the budget. I do look at the actual expenditures here and then average that out. And fortunately, the last 5 years, we have seen periods, for instance, 2019, where we had periods, I think it was 42 days straight that we were on 24/7 patrol with our crews out there monitoring because the river stage just stayed super high. And for our emergency action plan, they're out there monitoring the levee system, looking for seepage, boils, and then protecting the pumping plants to ensure that they're operational. So lastly here on the wages and cost, or the budget assumptions for labor, we are still, there's 12 full-time equivalent positions at the district. We're not proposing any increase to staff at this time. So the total budget impact for wages and all this stuff is about $145,000 in the budget. We do have some other things going on in the personnel budget for pension expense. The board did approve last month the transition to the CERP 1, but we do include in the budget for the Tier 1 and to unofficially use the 15-year amortization schedule so that we're on a 30-year schedule. If we actually officially do it with PERS, it's like a one-time reset, and then if we ever need flexibility in the future, say something happens and the district wants to make a lower payment, we're stuck in at the 15-year, but we unofficially can make additional contributions, and that's what we've been recommending for the past 2 years to pay down that unfunded liability, our employer portions 3%. And these percentages here of the employer portion is based on the actuarials from a year prior and our best guess as we move into the next fiscal year. The Tier 2, the active employees in that group, we're recommending to pay it off annually so we don't accumulate any debt or interest to amortize those payments. So, $8,000 expense, again, for the PEPRA employees, about a little over $7,000. So the intent is to pay off annually the Tier 2 and the PEPRA, and then work towards the 15-year amortization schedule, make those additional contributions for the unfunded liability, and then that gets us off our books, depending on market conditions with PERS. And then we also talked about the OPEB, the retiree healthcare plan, pay-as-you-go. We do have our annual contribution, the pay-as-you-go of $108. And then this is what I was referencing and the board approved last month, was the CERP 1. We have a level payment option for our ARC payment of $62,000. It has a 10-year level payment, so this will be now normalized for the next 10 years, $62,000 expected there, and will be paid off in 10 years and saving the district in upwards of $350,000 by doing it this way. And our unfunded liability is done there. So we're making really good progress. We are probably in the 99th percentile of public agencies in the state as far as unfunded liabilities and other post-employment benefits. So the district has done a fantastic job over the last few years to not accumulate that liability and not push it down the road, and very solvent here in our plan and approach. So really happy that we've gotten on this program the last 2-3 years and have some light at the end of the tunnel. There are numerous other agencies. There's a county in the northern part of California that's facing huge liability and have been kicked out of PERS. So they're the 1 percentile, we're the 99th. Administrative expenditures, again, a really busy chart here. I do want to point out the budget variance. The Finance Committee did review this, and there were no changes to the recommendation. I do want to point out the budget drivers for admin. Liability insurance is probably our largest expense and driver there of $171,000. We do anticipate a 13% increase in those premiums, and that's been communicated with us from our insurance carrier. And this is reflective of the cost increase of last year was it was like 12.7%. So we're anticipating the same thing. We built that into the budget. We do have an election this fall, potentially, depending on the number of nominating petitions we received when the candidacy opens. Due to the other mailings that we want to do and communicate with the public about our election process and be very transparent here, as well as the cost to do the mailing for the mail-in ballots and then tabulating the vote, about $100,000 if we end up having an election. And we won't know whether we have an election until the nominating petitions close in September, and then we can set our ballot and send it out. So $100,000 here, and then legal expense of $77,000, a little bit upwards here, and there's a trend a little bit here to cover the election expenses, also included in that $77,000, a slight increase to help us through the proposed fee and Prop 218 process if the board decides to move forward with that. And that'll be discussed on item 6.2 later this morning. And then public relations expense, again, this is a carryover from the budget that was approved, or the contract that was approved last fall for Allen Strategic and other district, public relations in general is being more communicative with the public and providing these, the graphics and mailers and things like that. So we have increased that budget to cover the desire of the board and the urbanization committee in particular to keep moving forward. And the video that I showed you that was playing at the start of the board meeting is just one of those products that's been produced. We are working on some refinements there. That was very fortunate to have Allen Strategic and particularly Page Design, one of their subcontractors for graphic design work. They turned that video around for us in less than 24 hours so we can provide it to the chamber at the state of Natomas. We will add voiceover to that stuff, but that's kind of the level of effort that it takes. And so we've included the $74,000. Total budget impact and changes for the admin budget is about $81,000 over last year, and largely due to election, liability insurance, and legal. The operations and maintenance budget, this is a consolidated chart here. I'll just go through the drivers again. Facility repairs are up for Plant 1A and Plant 8. We did learn in October that Plant 1A, during that October storm event, we couldn't get the plant to actually turn on. So we do have our mechanical vendor for those pumps and that equipment coming out. We do hope, and it will be imperative, that Plant 1A has some capacity to operate during the Reach A work by the Corps when they take pumping Plant 1B down. There is, as we negotiated with the Corps and SAFCA, the option for the contractor to have a bypass system in, but I think it is really important for the district to try to get Plant 1A as operational as possible, and the Corps has been asking for it as well. So we've included about $130,000 there to kind of give us a Band-Aid and kind of limp through for the next couple of years until the CIP plan is fully funded. And in Plant 8, there's some more work on the trash racks and a little bit of general stuff there. The power consumption in the budget, again, this is one of those things. I look at the 4-year or the 5-year average here. Largely, we can do really well in the budget or blow it completely depending on how much pumping we do and the flood season that's occurred. The last 2 years have been relatively dry, and therefore our average expenditures is down a little bit. 2019, however, was significantly more. So I take that average of about $450K. And then field services up about the total budget is about $267,000 here. Veg management makes up $190,000. This is a continuation of the program that the board approved last year, and a doubling of our budget for drain maintenance for vegetation management. We're starting to see some really good progress. The district does have a drone now. We're working on getting our pilot's license to fly that drone. And so we'll have that in place, but we really want to share some of this footage and just show the stark contrast from essentially, and I'll just give Gabe the credit here because he deserves it. There'll be a stark contrast between the footage that was provided to us from one of our partner agencies prior to Gabe coming on, and then the progress we made last fall. And we're chipping away at the aquatic vegetation again, and we have a plan in place. And so I'm hopeful by this fall that I'll be able to show you some really good footage of what we've achieved here, and fortunate that the board has recognized the need here and funded it last year, and we're proposing to do that same level of effort. I do want to point out that the product expense, the material expense, just like other materials and inflationary concerns, has increased quite a bit. And so that's where this is driven for the herbicides. There's a pretty stark increase in the materials just based on inflationary expense. And then lastly, fuel. We normally budget around $40,000 for fuel. Just to cover us here in the budget, I'm doubling that. The fuel expenditures were based on, last year's budget were based on fuel prices in the, mid to upper $2 range. Now it's pretty consistent since the beginning of the year, pushing $6 a gallon. So unknown on the fuel. Hopefully that comes back down, and we'll see what the U.S. policy on domestic oil and production, if anything changes here, but we're anticipating a doubling of the fuel expense in next year's budget. Other O&M stuff, we do not have any equipment purchases scheduled for this year. We've done very, very well and very fortunate to have the FMAP grants in years prior. They have since really limited the availability for equipment purchases in that grant program, but we certainly took advantage of that, replaced a lot of our heavy equipment and some off-road heavy equipment that was otherwise would have been replaced by the district. So very much capitalized on the ability that was afforded. And then last year and the year prior, the board made the decision to update our rolling stock, our fleet. So we replaced most of, if not all of the light duty trucks and equipment that the field staff use to do the levee patrols. And we're in good shape for a few years, certainly. So really commend the board in making those investments and providing the resources to staff that they need to get the job done. And so for this year, no equipment, the FMAP grant and expenditures. This is the grant award that the board just approved on item 5.7, and then some other expenditures for consultant expense. The capital budget, we do have a capital budget proposed this year, close to $3 million. Partly, this is rollover of the pre-engineering work for pumping plant 8. There's a significant portion in the capital budget to do security at the pumping plants, about $750,000. We've had numerous break-ins over the past year, in particular over the past 3 months. We had a backhoe stolen from one of the pumping plants, and it's time for the district to probably have video surveillance at our pumping plants. It may require the Wi-Fi connection and internet connection to provide kind of that real-time video so we can peek in there. We may have to do some improvements for high-speed internet at the plants as well, and so the expense just jumps up. We'll lock this in. We don't have a proposal yet. If the board does approve the plan here, we'll get out and put a solicitation for proposals out on the street, and then evaluate that and award that contract and get going on plant security. And then also, we do have the order in, the board did approve last year, the plant 1B transformer purchase. We've placed the order, it's in review. And so we're working through it. It was a large lead time when the board approved that and we sent over that request. We're working with SMUD to get that secured, but yeah, it was 25 to 30 weeks. So this will transfer over into next year's budget before we actually have to make that payment. And then lastly, things, recommendation from the urbanization committee to provide, streaming services if we do meet in person again, hopefully, sometime in this next year, but get our boardroom set up to be able to continue kind of these live streams where people can log in from anywhere, but also have it so that it's, professional quality and there's good audio visual content and no crossover interference, and picks up the board's comments and things like that. So we're working on setting that up, and we do have 3 proposals. This is the middle road proposal. We're going to invite probably this middle road proposal out to our office before we return to the board with a contract award here to give us a demonstration and possibly even visit one of the other setups that they have to just see how it works and look at the content that's provided. So the budget impact for capital is up, 1.6 million. So overall, the budget variance from last year and expenditure-wise is $1.4 million, as explained in those variances and the various aspects. Lastly, and again, the Finance Committee did recommend and had consensus to move this forward in budget assumptions to discuss today with the board. So I'll open it back up for comment and be happy to go back to any slides if you'd like.
Hey, Kevin, this is Chris. I did have some questions on the personnel. You said that 10 out of the 12 staff are going to get merits, and I couldn't find anything in any of the body.
Oh, sorry, I didn't, if I said 10 out of 12, I didn't mean that. I said that my intent there was that some are due merit increases, and I'd have to go back through in the background to see, but actually a large number of our employees are at the top of their pay scale currently.
So that begs the question, and do we need to adjust our pay scales then to make sure we're in line with CalPERS and reporting to CalPERS? And does our policy allow for merits when they're off scale?
It does not, and no one would be off scale. So what happens when we adopt the budget, if the board does provide a COLA, in June, if the board adopts the budget, the second item immediately following is adopting our official pay rate schedule, which was reflective of that COLA increase. The merit that's due is all within the specified salary range with the COLA applied. So well within, and then we'll report that to PERS if the board adopts the official pay rate schedule immediately following the budget in June. We adopt that and it's effective July 1.
Okay, so I just want to make sure, so those under the merit policy, people have been looked at. I don't want somebody who hasn't gotten a merit for 3 or 4 years to lose out, or they'd be maybe doing a good job that we want to be able to give that merit to them, that somehow we make sure that somebody hasn't gone too long without some kind of merit to, show that they've improved or whatever.
Yes. And those that are not at the top of the pay scale did receive a merit last year if they earned it, and will again indeed receive a merit increase this year. The adjustment then after, if they reach the top of the pay scale, the only adjustment aside from doing a total compensation survey and making a decision later on is the annual COLA if the board provides that. So that keeps them pace with inflation. But once they reach the top of the pay scale, no merit, because that goes beyond the official salary schedule for the district. So we've corrected a lot of things since 2019, and people are on path. We do have a couple entry-level employees that just joined the district recently, so they're very early on in their pay scale, and they did receive the merit increase last year that the board adjusted backwards and provided to that. So yep, everybody's in line and doing great, and the employees are happy about what we've established here in the last 3 years, and they all understand and they know, and it's been phenomenal.
Okay, well, I would just say, not necessarily part of this budget, but I would ask if possible that we look at that in the personnel committee to make sure that we're not, somebody isn't capped out for so many years, not eligible for merit, for discussion, in the future on that. Which brings up the other question. These merits and COLAs, they're not going to apply to recent hires, are they? Or what will apply to a recent hire under 6 months?
Yeah, so under 6 months, I'd have to go back.
Will it apply to new hires? That's really all I'm.
Yeah, the COLA does apply because it changes the salary scale for those employees, those that are recent hires, because we keep that salary scale. But those that haven't been here, the merit won't apply. They won't. It's not included in the budget to give them a merit increase if they've just recently joined the district. I mean, we want to see at least a year demonstration they're progressing through and get experience as opposed to just awarding the merit just because it turns July 1. So that's not included, but the COLA is, because it moves the salary range for those that are in the same position. And then it becomes this really strange situation with PERS to have two different pay schedules, and how do you not apply the COLA? But the COLA does apply to the position base, and then the merit wouldn't be applied unless they've been here for 12 months.
Okay. And if you could, I couldn't find the personnel minutes in the last meeting. You said, so if there's in the future.
Oh, it's in this board packet under the board minutes because it did turn into a special board meeting.
Okay. Okay, thank you. That's it. And another quick question: do we still have retired annuitants working for us?
We do have in our the management support, and that is included in the budget. So yeah, Paul Devereaux is still providing us significant coverage with the core project for Gabe and I. He does cover a lot of that, as well as the encroachment permits that fall out of safeguard for the core work and processing those. He is limited to 320 hours for the year, and that's included in the budget. And probably about $27,000, I think, is the budget number for Paul's help. With all the activities we have going on, I still significantly need, and Gabe does too, that coverage. We have reduced back some other consultants that we had been working with in years prior and taken on that role. So in last year's budget, we reduced that expense by about $40,000, and that more than covered the expense for Paul.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions from the board on the draft budget?
Hey, Kevin, when will we find out whether or not we get the, if we qualify for the FMAP grant again? Because if there's anything else we can do to help out families, especially with inflation and gas prices, that would be really helpful for our community.
Yeah, the FMAP applications due June 15th. We usually receive notification from the state of a grant award, possibly this fall, but the funds don't become available probably until next spring, right? So this year, it was actually earlier than most other years. We signed the funding agreement, I believe, in March. The really great thing about this grant program is that you actually can do an advanced payment request. And so we actually, on our books, if you look at our budget to actual, we already have the $450,000 in our savings account before we've done any of the work, which is atypical of grant programs where you usually submit for reimbursement post expenditure. They give us that money up front and they say, go do the work, and then we'll handle the accounting on the back end. It's fantastic. So when you see the budget to actual report, treasurer's report in June, you're like, well, where did this additional revenue come from? So it doesn't really balance with the budget presentation. From a communication standpoint, I want to make sure that we understand expenditures for this year will be that 450. The revenue side, we've already received it. So we're hopeful to know probably September, October timeframe if we've been awarded that application that we'll submit by June 15th. So thanks for giving me the authorization to submit it and then execute the funding agreement when it comes in. So everything's in place, and we'll be ready to go if the state does award that amount. Other questions from trustees on the draft budget?
Kevin, I appreciate the workshop on this. Obviously, some things to digest here. So I know when are we coming back to actually consider approval of the budget?
Yeah, so typically, so I've been working the last month and a half with the committees and building consensus and recommendations on the various components here. Today is the results of that work. And then based on the board's feedback here, I would present a final draft budget or a final budget for approval at the June board meeting for the trustees, so it becomes effective July 1.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I think I am a member of, I think, the only committees that don't get a budget brief. So I'm still reviewing and digesting, so I want to be respectful of everyone's time. I'm still digesting, and between now and our next meeting, I will have questions, but I can talk to you offline about that, and if necessary, bring them up at the next
Yeah,
meeting.
that's great.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. So feel free to reach out to me, Nick, and I'd be happy to sit down with you and walk through if you have questions or want more detail. You are, again, like last year, the only trustee that's not on one of the committees that gets to review budgets. So I'm glad we had a chance to catch up a little bit yesterday morning to just kind of update you on a few things before today's meeting. So if you want to do that again, let me know. Be happy to do that, and then we can have some really good conversation. If there are no other budget changes or recommendations from the board today, this will pretty much be final copy that you see in June. But if there are, again, continue to review that budget narrative that I sent out in the board packet. Ask questions of me if you'd like further clarification or want to understand a number. But this will pretty much be what you see in June for approval. Just like in years past. So really good process. We have a budget approved July 1. We just start working again.
Yeah, and I will just say, Kevin, I think one of the areas that certainly I have a keen interest on, well, obviously we want to take care of the folks that are actually on the ground and doing the work, obviously to protect the basin. And so, inflation is crazy right now. So I certainly don't have any issues with that. I mean, that's really a core issue for me, and I'm pleased to see that. Also, to the caller earlier, I believe it was Ms. Doe talking about security issues. That is something also I'm very focused on. I do have significant concerns, ongoing concerns about the impacts of homeless individuals and encampments and risks they present to our system. So those are areas that I certainly will be really focused on. So anyway, I don't want to drag down the conversation today. I do appreciate all the work that's gone into this. So thank you.
Yeah, Nick, and since you did bring that up, I do want to point out, and it's in one of the budget line items in the board packet, I do have an increase in security patrol expense of close to $100,000 for next year to provide some more frequent support of patrolling, particularly the district's levee systems as they're impacted by different inhabitants of the levee. And we'll work further with the legal committee to talk about how we want to approach the significant amount of dumping that occurs, particularly on the eastern portion of the district from Arden Garden Connector all the way past Interstate 80. And the significant impacts that it has for the district and expenditures. So we'll develop that a little bit further if we need to get some policy together, but do want to point out we are anticipating increased security patrol, particularly in that area. And so thanks for making that point. Any other questions from the board? All right, hearing none, we'll move on to item 6.2. Again, this was just for discussion and review, and I'll return back to the board in June with a very similar budget. 6.2. I'm going to walk through the presentation we have for this program, and this is a program that has been put together, and so we're it's the 4 Natomas levees, lift pumps, lives, and longevity. So before the board today on item 6.2 is the technical memorandum and kind of the culmination of lots of finance committee meetings, lots of work with our consultant MBS to provide together a framework to address the district's long-term financial needs, and which includes capital investment as well as ongoing operations and maintenance costs. The district's been working on this for a little over 2.5 years with the start of phase 1 of the comprehensive financial plan. We'll get into some of those details, but what the board has been provided with in the board packet was a tech memo, which looks at the strategy to provide the funding for our 2 basic services, right? Levee protection, and then our lift pumps, or the dewatering of the internal portion of the basin, and making sure that we're investing in capital replacement infrastructure well ahead of run to failure, which is our current MO, which is costly and stuff. So as we go through, we've been working with Allen Strategic and page design to put this program together. We will dedicate an independent site for Natomas.org, which will be live June 1 to talk about this program. Time frame here, there's no decision to be made by the board today. It's really review and discussion, make sure that we're aligned, consultant and staff is aligned with the board's desires to continue to move towards the completion of phase 2.2, and that's our rate study and proposed revenue funding sources. And so that decision and the final engineer's report won't be ready until this fall, at which point we'll return to the board for approval of the engineer's report. We're waiting for new assessment data. We're required to have the latest assessment data when we do this, at which point one of the board meetings this fall, the board will be asked to approve the draft engineer's report and open a public hearing process wherein the public can give us feedback or comments that has a specified time frame to approve that, and then it'll be by majority protest once the public hearing is done. There's a two-step process for fee proposals. And so again, today is draft, or it's a tech memo, and it's for discussion and review purposes only, and no decision today is being made by the board on a fee increase or an assessment increase or any of that stuff. We just want to make sure we're aligned with the board and the expectations so that we meet our end goal this fall with a final draft engineer's report. So I'm going to walk through this presentation and take a few minutes, and this will be loaded up to the district's website. This will be the kind of landing spot for the community and stakeholders to view. The fornatomas.org has lots of information. We will have that website live by June 1st, maybe even sooner. But this is one of those items that'll be on there, and what we'll be talking to the community about over the next 4 to 5 months ahead of the board making a decision on the engineer's report due this fall. So, like I mentioned earlier, levees and lift pumps are two primary, things of concern in infrastructure. I'm going to walk through briefly here, what we look at in funding a flood-safe future for Natomas, the history of RD1000's funding, the current state of our infrastructure, how Natomas has evolved over time since our last adjustment to rates and the last assessment was approved, and then kind of the catastrophic combination, the perfect storm, and how these things align and what we could be facing if we don't move to fully fund, capital infrastructure investment as well as ongoing inflationary costs. And then, facing flood facts, what does it mean? Like, why is Natomas concerned about, flooding? What does it mean to the community, and what could happen, and what lessons have been learned in other areas of the United States? So we'll walk through that briefly. And then 6 is where we get a little bit into the meat and potatoes here about, funding a funding flood safety fairly, in a new approach in what's proposed here, potentially with a new property related fee in combination with our existing assessment, and then the public process, what we intend to do moving forward. So the history of RD1000 funding, our current funding revenue source is roughly about $3.7 million a year from our existing district assessment based on 5 zones of benefit. This was approved back in 1992, and we generate, depending on the assessment roll, about $2.3 million annually from that revenue stream. And this covers most, if not all, of the district's O&M and capital infrastructure needs as identified back in 1992. Again, that assessment was approved pre-Prop 218. Deborah, I saw your comment, and yes, we will absolutely address that item. Sorry, I can't type it in the chat just yet, Deborah, but I got it, and we'll get to it. Yep. And then item 2 here is the Consolidated Capital Assessment District number 2 with SAFEGA. We talked about this earlier today in our budget presentation, but we did finalize and execute that agreement this spring. Yeah, it's been on the books to do for a couple of years now, and we got that executed with an inflationary cost here. And this really recognizes the residents in Natomas that are paying into an existing assessment to Safeco for the levee improvement work that's been funded by the locals as part of the Natomas Levee Improvement Project. And so we do receive funding from CCAD2 to cover the increased maintenance cost of the larger levee system. And so that's roughly $1.4 million. This funding does go away at the term when Safeco pays off that bond funding. I believe it's 2041 or 2042. So that funding will terminate at that point, but well beyond the planning horizon for us today. But at some point, the district will need to consider that down the road, 20, 25 years from now. So we have had a static rate since 1992. Just in comparison purposes here, this really hits home for me is, the average home price in Natomas in 1992 was $121,000. Today, or at least as of last month, that average home price in Natomas is close to $840,000, a little over $830,000 just in comparison for like-sized homes. And so, the district's rate staying static since that time, everything has increased in cost since 1992. But the district's charge for our assessment has not. It's remained static. And there's some resulting facts to that. Well, what happens when you don't increase and keep pace with, ongoing, you're kind of pushing off and deferring maintenance and replacement of infrastructure. And so we're faced with that today, and we'll get to that later in the presentation about our current state of infrastructure. Oh, it's right now, actually. So we're currently in a mode of run to failure. Most of our equipment, aside from the equipment that's been replaced with the core project, is well beyond its useful life. We see failures during storm events, most recently during the one in October this year. We were dangerously close, in fact, less than 3 inches away in our main drain from putting water onto Interstate 80 at West El Camino, which would have been devastating impacts in the middle of the night. Because our equipment did shut down, we did have failure and it wasn't reliable. It's inefficient and costly. Some of our pumping plants are very old. They're not energy efficient. They're very labor intensive to actually get running, particularly pumping plant 1A. There are many single points of failure within our district without redundancy and reliability to back up in a major storm event. So we're dangerously close. We're teetering that line. And like I said, and I don't want to overstate because it was, close to a 200-year flood event in October this year, but it can happen, and it nearly happened this October. I'm extremely grateful and forever grateful to our field staff for immediately jumping to that call and getting things running. I mean, they did a fantastic job in October, and yeah, we avoided being on the evening news for sure based on their efforts. It's risky. The reliability of these plants is risky. And literally, this is a picture from pumping plant 1A that you see on the right-hand side of our screen here. That's on the end of a pump motor. That is duct tape that you see on the end of that pump motor. It literally is duct tape. And there's a larger printout. If you watched the video at the beginning of the presentation, there was actually a portion there of inside pumping plant 1A where this pump's located and just the old infrastructure. And so, yeah, no, it's duct tape and barbed wire for some of our facilities. And this is a result of 30 years of kind of static investment in infrastructure and static rates. But the board did recognize this. In 2019, we started on a plan for our capital improvement plan update, which then led into understanding what our infrastructure needs to be to change and to flip this situation over from run to failure to preemptively replacing on a set useful life schedule. So we're getting there. This run to failure mode is costly. When we have emergency shutdowns, you're paying premiums to get materials. You're paying premiums for contractors to come out and get things, up and running right away. We want to replace on a set schedule. We normalize expenditures, and we hit those things before we run into a situation where you know, we're in an emergency situation. So we're changing that. The board made that decision in 2019, finalized that capital improvement plan in 2020, which then fed into our our comprehensive financial plan. We understand what the 30-year outlook is for capital infrastructure, where we currently are and what those needs are. That information is available on our website under our capital improvement plan update. And so we've been, like I said, working on this for about 2.5 years. The board recognizes the current state here, and we're doing something about it. And that's, you know, what you're seeing here today is what we're proposing back out to get the revenue we need. I do want to talk briefly about the evolution of Natomas. Since 1995, you know, in 1992 was the last assessment. Just look at the expansive growth in population and urbanization of the basin. I believe this is on the left-hand side here. I'm pretty sure that's the Arco Arena site, which, you know, in 2 years it will look different. That big building won't be sitting there if the proposed development happens. But what we have today and the number of people in the community that we have within our basin that relies on us, RD1000, to keep them dry during significant storm events, and to invest in our infrastructure to remove water that's internal to the basin, as well as fortify the levee system, patrol it and monitor it, and make sure that we don't have incoming water that will impact them significantly. We do have a number of development projects in the loop. And so even in 2 years from now, you'll see even more kind of developments in this area, and it'll be interesting to see. But we do have this obligation to make sure that the community is protected and that we're providing place safe. So I thought this was really interesting. These are off Google Earth from a time-lapse aerial there that just shows the rapid kind of change in what's occurred in our basin. I can tell you that RD1000's basin is one of, if not the most urbanized reclamation district in the state of California. We do have some unique challenges with an urban setting as compared to other reclamation districts. A lot of reclamation districts in the Delta still look like what you see here from 1995, what our district used to be, large scale agriculture. Our district's different. We do have special legislation that covers you know, and recognizes our urbanization aspect, and that's reflective in how our elections and how the Board of Trustees are elected to the board, assessment and parcel seats, to recognize this difference, that we are unique. But I think we are the most urbanized reclamation district in the state. So with those three things combined, static rates for 30 years, neglected infrastructure, duct tape, and the evolution of the community, we're prime, and the combination of those three things is prime for significant danger for flooding for Natomas. Fortunately, Natomas has received significant state, local, and federal funding to fortify the levee system since the disasters in New Orleans from Katrina. But most recently, and what we're talking about today, primarily my focus here is the neglected internal infrastructure in our stormwater system that moves water out of the basin and into the river system. And, you know, New Orleans was devastated. The levee systems were devastated in Katrina. Just recently, Hurricane Ida, the levees have been fortified. The levees held up fantastically. They did a tremendous job. They didn't have incoming water from external sources interior to Louisiana behind the levees. However, their internal infrastructure and their backbone infrastructure failed. At one point during reading reports and speaking with managers out there, flood operation managers out there, at one point they lost over 50% of their pumping capacity and still saw significant flooding because the water that entered into the basin, they couldn't move out. And largely due to power failures and pump failures. And so, you know, it's a eye-opening moment. It's an awakening moment for Natomas. Is like, yeah, the levees are doing great, and we're significantly encouraged and appreciative of the significant investment that's been made in the 42 miles of exterior levee. But RE1000 still has work to do to be able to move water out of the basin and into the river system to keep us dry. And so when we look at those things, the perfect, combination. I did talk about the flooding risk, the greatest flooding risks in the U.S., New Orleans and Natomas, and we might be #1 now as they continue to improve the New Orleans area. This picture here was from the '97 event. Fortunately, our levees held up and the water moved into the Yolo bypass and into other areas away from the urban population centers. But this stuff does happen, does occur, and we've identified. I do want to point out that one of the major differences, if we have a major flooding event like Katrina or Hurricane Ida, the water temperatures in Louisiana during those events are in the upper 60s to mid 70s of water temperature. During our storm events, if we had a flood event, it's in the middle of winter, cold water, less than 55-degree temperature, and we wouldn't see much evacuation of people wading through water or escaping that way to get to higher ground. Largely part to the human body loses muscle control after 3 minutes in 55-degree water. And so you won't see those same images, and far more risky in that ability that if we did have a failure, we'd probably see a significant more per capita impact on lives than what was witnessed in Katrina or Ida. And it's an important distinction in my mind, the difference, because like, oh, I'll just walk through the water. Well, no, you won't. So I do want to play a video here, and I'm going to work on
Natomas Basin in Northern California. Natomas Basin.
This is a video that the Corps put out, and I pulled from them. And so it's a little bit dated here. I think this was done in 2018, but it does talk about the impacts of flooding in Natomas and what's been invested. There obviously have been construction improvements and updates since 2018 as the ongoing Natomas levee improvement projects, keeps progressing. But I want to show this here. It's not too long. It talks about the impacts. I'm working with Allen Strategic and Page Design to create a similar video for us that updates updates for RD1000 here so that we can use to talk to the community. But I do want to show this today.
In Northern California. Looks like any other neighborhood, right? Except Natomas and the Sacramento region are some of the most at-risk regions in the nation for catastrophic flooding. Local, state, and federal agencies are undertaking more than $1 billion in construction to upgrade the 42 miles of levees that surround the area and help hold back floodwaters. The Sacramento Area Flood Control Agency and the Central Valley Flood Protection Board have completed improvements to 18 miles of levees, and over the next several years, the Corps of Engineers will work on completing the remaining 24 miles.
So this is part of the update. That's dated.
Why invest so much in just one region? Because flooding in the Natomas Basin has devastating impacts beyond California. The Natomas Basin is home to more than 100,000 people, the Sacramento International Airport, and California's two largest national highways pass through the heart of the region. The loss of life and property caused from catastrophic flooding would be immense, causing significant disruption throughout Sacramento and heavily impacting local, state, and federal emergency resources. Additionally,
So that's the presentation. It talks about kind of the impacts that the Corps put out when they started the inlet program and got the funding together. So that's what could happen. And so how do we address this kind of perfect combination and culmination? So the board did embark on a comprehensive financial plan after the capital improvement plan update was accomplished. That fed in as a major component about addressing the infrastructure needs. But we do want to introduce kind of a new approach. What's been learned since 1992 and how to fund flood infrastructure and understanding what's required. So we're proposing and what we're going to talk to the community about is a fiscally responsible future, identification of current and future infrastructure investment, the comprehensive financial planning that's been done to date and modeling out our future with different increases and expectations as far as expenditures of the district. And then how do we close that funding gap? You know, we did identify an annual need of about $5.5 million through those two significant projects. And we currently receive about $3.7 million. So how do we close that funding gap? And that's what we've been working on with MBS and the tech memo that you see, and then making sure that there's fairness in the fees and assessments that are proposed by the district and required by state legislation. And so we've arrived at this point where we feel it's smart, it's good, it's responsible to bifurcate the two essential functions of the district and the related cost of service for each. And so I'll talk about that bifurcation between levees and lift pumps, as we're calling them, but it's exterior flood protection versus interior water removal. And so that bifurcation really looks at two things. The levees, you know, and our essential flood safety functions. About 40% of our current and future expenditures are related to levee protection and flood protection, and that exterior system that fortifies us from water from the Sacramento and American River and other influences. Our current assessment, and so that benefits all properties within our district, right? Everyone benefits from that fortification of the levee system. And so the funding sources for that levee protection would be through our existing assessment, as well as CCAD2 with SAFCA, which we get about $1.4 million from. And then our existing assessment, if you remember from the budget and earlier in the slide presentation, right now we currently receive about $2.3 million from our existing assessment. When we bifurcate here and what we're talking about and proposing to separate off the stormwater services, we feel that we can reduce the annual revenue requirement from the existing assessment from $2.3 million to roughly $800,000 to close that funding gap. If the fee proposal that I'll talk about here in a second is approved by the public and put into place, that would generate the $3.3 million needed on an annual basis to fund the capital infrastructure improvements, as well as the ongoing O&M for internal flood services. We do have a portion of our district that is provided stormwater services from the city of Sacramento or others that do not use our facilities, do not rely on our pumping plants, and they pay for the city of Sacramento's stormwater services. And so those folks potentially wouldn't participate in our stormwater services, but still receive benefit from the fortified levees and our activities there. So our stormwater services, this is the new approach. This is the new thinking here, is developing a property related fee that ensures fairness for flood protection. And so 60% of our current and future expenditures are anticipated to be in the stormwater services component of this proposed fee. And so the stormwater service fees reflect the services received. So depending on how much you use our stormwater services determines how much you pay. So if you have a lot of runoff that directly goes into the district's stormwater system, it obviously requires more pumping than someone that has complete retention or detention on their property that don't drain into those services and therefore don't require us to operate our pumps or replace our pumps or check on the drainage facilities. So the more you contribute to the drain water system and our stormwater service system, you pay your proportionate share of that increased expenditure. And this is what's required under Prop 218, required by statute, that we look at that we're not, unduly charging a property owner a property fee for services not rendered. And so the funding source for that 60%, this is that bifurcation. We're going to separate off that 60% from the existing assessment and the SAFCA revenue that we receive and propose this new property related fee to address this concern and generate $3.3 million of revenue to fund that portion. We have developed, and part of the attachments in today's staff report, the technical memorandum, there are 23, I believe 23 different customer classes that ranks out, and there's a formula behind there that calculates the averages for, based on land use, how much your contribution is to our drain water system. And so that's what we're proposing. That's the basis of the tech memo and how we're moving forward. This is another slide here. It just basically shows kind of the dichotomy of the different services and the range of services we provide. The airport, largely their impervious surface area or coefficient that calculates into these customer classifications. A large portion of the water that falls within the airport's property ends up directly into the district storm drain system. In contrast, those properties that have really great infiltration rates, primarily in open fields and good soil types, primarily in ag fields, don't contribute as much during large storm events, and therefore their impervious surface coefficient is lower and a lower derived rate. This is based on land use information that's provided by the county in the assessment roll, and then we use that with the rates for each different customer classification to generate the $3.3 million, which is directly reflective of the impact and the expenditure that the district experiences to service those different customer classes. And so the public process, lastly here, and I'll turn it over and open it up for comments. This is a fully transparent and collaborative process. The board did want to ensure when we embarked on this effort that we did provide outreach and an education program for the public, get their feedback through that process. Hence the reason why we're not asking the board for any decision today or to approve anything today, because we want to spend the next 4 to 5 months direct engagement, face-to-face forums with the community to talk about this stuff. If there's a community group out there, please invite us. We would love to come attend. We're also, proactively seeking them out for different community organizations that will begin attending their meetings as a guest speaker to talk about this. We also have some other outreach materials that we'll continue to provide through. And just ensuring, the public process here, that there's fairness in the fees and assessments, that it's fiscally responsible, and that we're providing a flood safe future for the district. We've been working really hard, with our consultant, our legal team, as well as the finance committee to present this to the board today. And it's culminated in the tech memo that's attached to the staff report, as well as an example, which is subject to change of in the tables provided therein of the tech memo on what that would mean for each individual property owner. We will have our website up and running by June 1. It's fornatomas.org. It'll be the landing spot for all the information. What we intend to have is our capital improvement update, the comprehensive financial plan, our future, and then more materials to, again, embark on this education experience here with the community. And we will return to the board this fall with an engineer's report to consider. So at this time, I'd like to open it up to the board for review or discussion on the tech memo or anything that was presented this morning. I'd be happy to answer those questions and go from there.
Hey, Kevin, it's Elena. We passed the CIP a couple years ago, and I think of it as a working document. And I just wanted to make sure, and ask, can we make sure we factor in, the updates on the pumping plants that the feds are taking care of, and also calculate inflation as well?
Yeah, so in the model, and that's kind of it's really the last 3 or 4 months of inflation. That CIP updates, obviously from 2019, there could be some significant, difference in construction costs today, but that is worked into the financial model that the board did approve on phase 1. There are standard modeling tweaks, and it is adaptive, as you mentioned, but this is the best known information that we have at this time. And even with the current core projects that have replaced the pumping facilities, right? For a few of them that have been replaced, the useful life on that mechanical pumps and equipment in their industry standard is between 15 to 20 years, which is included for replacement within our 30-year planning horizon when we looked at the rates in the capital improvement plan. So we may have and so that just depends on construction scheduling and when those projects are implemented. But we did cover over this planning horizon complete replacement, even if it's new today, we're going to replace it within the planning horizon of the CIP. So it's covered.
Hi, Kevin, this is Chris. I did have a question. I appreciate the including, this is probably the third or fourth iteration I've read through, and I have some concerns, but I appreciate the fact that you included the existing assessment. What I have concerns over is the fact that we put in the chart the reduced existing assessment, and it's also in the technical memo saying it will be reduced, which I think technically, I don't know how we can put that in there when it hasn't happened. And my concern is we don't know how we're going to reduce the amount. We just know 800,000. And I would hate for us to be in some kind of legal issue when somebody says we put this out there and they say, I voted for the stormwater tax because you had a thing that says my existing assessment was going to be reduced. And then we modify it and it doesn't get reduced. And so that would be my concern, is that we get rid of that reduced existing assessment and let people see that this is what it's going to cost the way it is now, because we haven't taken that action to actually reduce the assessment.
Yeah, understood. So understood the comment here. What we want, and again, there's no action by the board. It's all proposed. But you are right. There is a potential reduction for the existing assessment. The board has not, certainly if the proposed property related fee is not approved by the public and we don't enact it, we can't reduce the existing assessment and fall further behind on funding. And so that would, yes, there's the potential to reduce the existing assessment to make up the funding gap with the new proposed fee and monies that we receive from SAFCA. And that would be adjusted by the board on an annual basis. And you do have to justify your assessment based on need on an annual basis. And so that would be a determination by the board every year with the new property related fee in place. It's like, what is the assessment rate that we're going to report to the county up to the maximum, which we're doing today. The board can determine any amount within that range up to the maximum without, further voter approval. Again, because pre-Prop 218. So the intent would be to reduce the existing assessment, and that's what we're going to talk about. But that hasn't had board action yet, and it largely hinges on the ability to approve the property-related fee. And then we look at it. We do have to justify our
exactly. And I just don't want to sell that or be out there telling people that we are, this is what's going to happen, because we don't know what we may have a major flood fight and we need to keep the assessment, right? So or if I'm understanding correctly, the Exhibit A table is based on the reduced existing assessment without the minimum $25. So it doesn't even reflect our current assessment, with the minimum $25 per parcel, I believe. So
yeah, so this in the tech memo, the table is derived. This is a conversation I had with MBS, and when we looked at arriving at a reduced assessment rate and I believe this is your request in the finance committee to show kind of what it would look like so that the public would know, right, our existing assessment, what it potentially would be, and in combination with the proposed fee, so you can see in total the difference of what they currently pay, what would possibly pay is proposed, and a difference there. So that table was charted there. I did ask Greg to just do, and it is footnoted in the technical memo, that there is no assumption for a base minimum fee that we currently have in our existing assessment. And that's certainly something that is afforded for us to do, and something that, and it's great feedback that we would receive from the board or public that, yeah, well, maybe we do install a base minimum fee. The formulary to derive at the $800,000 is just like a target goal for that existing assessment, because our annual needs identified about $5.5 million. You're right. If we do have a flood fight or we deplete reserves, we may have the need to generate more funding above the 5.5 to replenish those reserves, or however we need to. And that's the great thing. This is just a tech memo. We're adaptive here, and whatever we hear from the community or board feedback, we'll certainly work that into the engineer's report that then the board will take action on, which is the kind of the start of the public hearing process and the official legal action to do that. But everything here, that was an assumption from a staff level just to make an easy calculation and demonstration, but all the rates are subject to change. They will change significantly if property ownership has changed. This is based on the assessment data from 21-22. As soon as we have the new assessment data for 22-23, if land use classifications have changed, the property ownership may see a different data point. But this was to demonstrate at the request of the Finance Committee to show this table in the tech memo, so that when we're out on this, obviously publicly available document, that people could go and look and then start this conversation.
Well, again, I'm uncomfortable, and I understand we're not taking this, vote today, but I'm just uncomfortable putting in a proposed rate reduction. That way, people can't accuse us of bait and switch on we're gonna, this is what we're going to do. I don't think we can bind ourselves, and I don't think it would be fair to sell our stormwater fee assessment that way. I think we have a strong case, irrespective of the reduction in the fee. I think we have a strong case for the new, fee. And I think we just should be upfront with everybody and say, hey, this is what is technically true today and what would happen. And then we have the intent to reduce that current assessment. We just don't know. We just need to reduce it to 800,000. We haven't decided how we're going to do it. So that's my concern when we're trying to sell this.
Kevin, I just want to say thank you for putting this together. It's a great, it's a nice presentation and a good reflection of our district. This is a great starting point, and I look forward to hearing what else the Finance Committee works out while we hammer on these numbers. Again, a technical memo. We're just starting, guys.
Yeah, so the intent as we work through, thanks Elena for that feedback, I appreciate it. The intent would be to continue to work with Greg, meet with the community, get feedback from them, and look at a couple alternatives for the future. As Chris points out, a proposed, potential minimum fee on the existing assessment, leave that in, but maintain, obviously I don't consider it a bait and switch at all. The existing assessment does have the ability to go up to the $2.3 million, if we need it. But I think it's important for the community to know that in comparison, all right, well, we're trading off a little bit of the levy protection portion because we're paying on the stormwater side. So we have to communicate this. We're open. It's not final. We'll return to the board later this fall after the community outreach and other feedback from the Finance Committee and board, and then we'll finalize that and make a recommendation this fall for the board to open the public hearing process, and then we'll hear finality on our proposal and if we've achieved the target. Any other questions or comments from the board? I know we're running a little bit long, but this is a lot going on in this meeting this morning, so I appreciate the time here. And I'll just get back to our agenda. So with that, we're going to continue to work on this basis as the consensus and recommendation of the Finance Committee to put the tech memo together. They didn't have the advantage of seeing the revised, but we did have 3 different Finance Committee meetings on the memorandums. As Chris mentioned, it's about the 3rd or 4th version he's seen of it. And so we've been working through that level since the board took action for moving forward into phase 2.2 in December earlier this year. So we've learned a lot over the last 6 months. We think we're on the right path, and we're going to go out and work with the community and educate them about this need. So I appreciate the feedback. And if there's no further comments on item 6.2, we can move on to our last item. Sorry, I'm still on 6.1, which is Board of Trustees comments and committee meeting minutes. If there are any board comments or trustee comments that would like to be made at this point, we can do that now. Item 7 here.
Kevin?
Hi, Deborah. Yeah, this is where, if based on your chat comment, if you wanted to make comments here, this is your opportunity.
Okay. I've been really quiet this morning because I'm afraid that if I start talking, I might start crying. And here comes the waterworks. As some of you may know, my husband had a health emergency in December, and our life has been upside down since then. We have made the decision to downsize. We have sold our home, and we will be leaving the basin. So, as required, I will no longer own property in the district, and I will no longer have residency in the district. So I have to leave. I adore all of you, my two Toms, Rebecca and Scott. The most fun I ever had was when I spent 8 hours locked in a room with Bill Abbott and General Counsel for RT. So I love lawyers, and you guys have been amazing. My CEQA buddy, Nick. I'm sorry, I'm having a hard time, guys. I really love you guys. Elena, Chris, all of you, thank you for welcoming back my previous successor. I'm leaving again, but Chris is already here, so everything will work out. Jolena, Christine, I'm just heartbroken that I have to leave, but I have a very good reason. Kevin, if you would allow me to share my screen momentarily, I am joining another board.
Let me do this here. I'll make you the presenter. It should pop up to approve that.
This is the board I'm joining, guys. Do you see that?
I think at the bottom, Deborah, you have to click share your screen. Right underneath all the active cameras, there's a little toggle.
Okay, it disappeared. It disappeared.
So let me try one more time here. Yeah, so you might have to go and click back then. If you're sharing your screen, you might have to go and click back to the document, like close out of the, or minimize the GoToMeeting app.
Okay, do you see it now? You guys see that?
But we don't, unfortunately.
Okay.
Do you want to send it to me? If you send me an email, I can pull it up.
I can't send it to you. Anyway, I am joining another board. I am the co-executive director of the Jones family tribe. The CEO is a 3-year-old diva who I will be responsible for largely. And, you know, while not as interesting as this group. That's a group that I will be working with. And oh my God, Gabe, thank you so much for that tour. Kevin, you rock. I just love you all to pieces. The plan is to come back to Natomas. This worked out that we are living 2 minutes away from the 3-year-old diva's house, so I will be on call 24 hours. Pretty much, I wish you guys could see this. This is really.
I'm sorry, I'll try one last time here. I'm sure the board would love to see it. Oh yeah, you're still the presenter. I apologize for the go-to meeting sometimes, different applications, but.
Okay, I don't know what's going on, but anyway, that's
so
it.
Deborah, so just a question here for the board, and love having you on the board and getting to know you over the last couple of years. And I know I can at least speak on staff's behalf that we're sad about your situation and leaving us in Natomas. It's been a great pleasure for us. I do have one question, and that is in regards to for the district to continue. We would just need to know from you when you intend to vacate the position so that we can discuss on a future board agenda on how to fill the vacancy of the board. So if you have that information, you don't have to share it today. You can send me an email.
Okay. I do. I'm sorry, I just wasn't coherent. I am officially a resident of Natomas until May 31st.
Okay.
So you schedule any committee meetings, I'll be there as long as they occur before May 31st. But this is my last full board meeting.
Okay, that's helpful to know. And just for the board to know too, we do have a legal committee established for next Thursday, which will talk about Deborah's announcement. I'll get an agenda out on that, and then we'll return to the board, similar to when Jeff left the board and the board appointed Chris to fill his term. We'll check in with legal and return to the board with our options at the June board meeting for discussion. So thanks, Deborah, for that piece of clarification, and I'll open it up to the trustees to respond to Deborah's unfortunate news. But we're glad she has a new position as chief executive board president of the Jones family. And good luck in the Diva. I know I was a difficult general manager to work with it sometimes, but it sounds like you have your hands full with your new assignment.
Yeah, I'd rather work with you, Kevin. Really quite demanding. We're moving, and we're between the two houses, and she demanded to know where her toy kitchen was. Thank you for never demanding anything of me, Kevin.
Just a little bit of your time. Thanks, Deborah. All right, trustees, if you want to jump in here, I'll mute my mic.
I'm going to start, Deborah, if that's okay. But first off, send that picture to us all. You can forward it separately. I'd love to see it. And I really appreciate, getting to know you over the years. Certainly we've worked well together. And I know knowing that you're still in the community, although not in Natomas, is good news as far as I'm concerned. I look forward to, seeing you in the years to come.
Thank you, Tom.
Deborah, I want to say appreciate our friendship and I enjoy our conversations, and hopefully it pays better in this new position. And it's good to know that Kevin's not a diva or as big a diva as your granddaughter. So that's good news to hear. But we're gonna miss you, and and to look forward to when you come back.
Thank you, Chris.
Yeah, Deborah, thank you. I've had the pleasure of serving you on a couple of stints on the board. So it's unfortunate that we haven't all been physically together, obviously, the last couple of years. I can't believe it's been a couple of years, which is crazy. But thank you, and best to you and your family. Obviously, with you, families always come first, and I've always respected that. And frankly, that's all we have in life. And so the best to you, and yeah, we look forward to keeping in touch. Obviously, you're not leaving us. Leaving. You're still out there.
Yeah, thank you, Nick. I've been a public servant since I was 15 years old in some capacity. I've worked for every level of government except the state. As I told Councilmember Ashby, I'm not quite done yet. If the diva allows me, I'll find a way to get involved.
Thank you, Deborah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Hey, Deborah, I'm going to miss you. I enjoyed serving on urbanization with you. And, if you ever want to babysit another diva, I've got one for you. But, I look forward to your new adventure, and I wish you well. And, when you come back from your vacay, hit me up. I would love to know how things are going. And I just want to send my love to you and your husband.
Thank you. Thank you, Elena.
Yeah, Deborah, we're gonna miss campaigning with you. So we work well together, and I hope things do well for you in the future. And if you can come back to the board, I certainly wouldn't mind continuing our campaign. So best to you and your family.
Thank you, Tom. Love you.
All right, Deborah, thank you again from district staff and obviously the comments received from the trustees. We're going to miss you here, but that doesn't mean you have to be a stranger, and certainly love to keep in touch with you, and best of luck with the diva and the rest of the family. I can tell you it does change a little bit having 4 teenagers now. They don't become less divas, the problems just change. And so good luck, and you know that as being a mother as well. So best of luck on the move and the relocation, and we'll be in touch soon. And so if nothing further on board comments or trustee comments, Deborah, again, thank you. You've been a tremendous asset for the district and the Natomas community for a very long time, and we're forever grateful for your contributions to ensuring flood safety for Natomas. So turn it back over to the board for discussion or closing out the meeting here. Let's just share this screen one last time, because there are no closed session items, or at the conclusion. So if we're ready to adjourn and say our goodbyes, and hopefully for some of you start your weekend a little bit early, have a great weekend, and I take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Motion by Alice, second by Deborah Jones. You got in there. One last time on the record here. Thanks, Deborah. Jolene, will you take roll on adjournment?
Yes, Trustee Gilbert.
Aye.
Gilbert, I. Reader.
Aye.
Lee Reader, I. Aptis.
Aye.
Aptis, I. Baines.
Jag left the meeting about 10 minutes ago. He had another commitment at 10 o'clock.
Okay. Barandis.
Brandis, aye.
Brandis, I. Burns.
Aye.
Burns, I. Jones.
Jones, I. Jones out.
All right.
Love you guys. Love you as much as I love the Pittsburgh Steelers, and that's quite a bit.
Oh, now we're going to disagree. Go Niners. Motion to adjourn is approved. Have a great weekend, everyone, and we'll be in touch next week. Thank you.